Hi, let's talk about relocation grief. That sense of grief and loss that could come when we have a relocation, especially if we miss the old place a lot or we didn't want to move. I give you an example from my own experience. Years ago, one of my relocations was from the east coast of the US to Germany. And in Germany, I had great people around me, great setup, awesome quality of life, but I just could not enjoy any of it. I just couldn't allow it in myself. There was this blockage because I felt like if I allow myself to enjoy something, I would betray myself. And every fiber in me wanted to be back in the US. I really missed it at that point. And that is the dilemma that we can find ourselves in. And that's an extreme case of a sense of loss and grief. It doesn't have to be that strong, but that's the dilemma. We want to talk about that because there are solutions around that. So on a side note, let's point out, of course, we don't have to experience an excessive relocation grief or sense of loss when we have a relocation. And I think anybody who has moved a few times knows it can be very different every time. And it can be a very positive experience. Often it is. It was for me. It's for me. And just to realize that sometimes even it can come out in a very small form and maybe stay undetected because we're so busy with the details and the move that it doesn't really come out obviously, and that we might just be a little irritable or a little more depressed here and there, or easily angry or stuff like that. So let's just be aware that sometimes it can come out, the sense of grief and loss, also in very, very small forms. In the last video, we talked about the dilemma that I experienced in one of my relocations, that I sensed a lot of grief and loss, and I couldn't enjoy anything in the new place. I found a trick eventually, several tricks actually, and they also go along with findings in science, and that's always great. We will go into that in a second. I want to mention one important point that is important here, and that is when we experience grief because we lose a person close in our lives, let's say a partner, or for a child, a parent. Usually that experience is very devastating. We are depleted, there's not much energy left. When we have a relocation grief experience, I would say there is usually a window of energy, willpower that we can work with. And that is the key in this trick that I want to share. That extra energy, willpower that we have at our disposal. Now, when it comes to studies around the topic of relocation grief and loss, we usually use these models that we have from bereavement when you lose a person. We know the 5 phases of Kubler-Ross, the task-based model, dual process model, the adaptive grief style model. There's different models around that are very helpful to understand that process that we are going through when we experience grief and loss. And the tricks that I'm using are complementing that. They are not denying any of those processes. What I pointed out earlier, see that we have this window of willpower and energy, strength in us that we can use in the middle of the process that we are going through. And that's the fun thing about it. So here's the trick that helped me in that one example of a relocation where I experienced a lot of grief and loss and could not acknowledge anything beautiful in the new place or anything good. I was able to separate how I really felt from kind of a cognitive acknowledgement. And that goes like that. I hate to be here. I don't want to be here. I shouldn't be here. But actually, I gotta say these buildings look charming. Just to be fair, not because I enjoy it or anything, but just to be fair, from a neutral point, these buildings are charming. Or let's say on the marketplace, I hate to be here. I don't want to be here. Why am I here? I shouldn't be here. but I gotta say, just to be fair to this world, and just because I'm a grown-up person, you know, and a little bit responsible, I gotta say those flower arrangements are nice, and how the vegetables are laid out, it is beautiful. Just from a very neutral point, just to be fair to the world around me. And that made the huge difference. It made a huge difference because I was able to be true to my grieving process. I was able to be true to the sense of that I betrayed myself if I liked something. And still at the same time, because what we said about, there was some willpower left, there was some strength left that I had to say, okay, just to be fair, just to be, you know, a grown-up, you know, adult person, responsible, being able to be objective and fair to the world, I will acknowledge that this is beautiful. And that separation, it was kind of like living a little paradox, kind of like living like parallel worlds. In a sense, my grieving process, what I really admitted and felt, and at the same time having these statements that I made and acknowledgements, more like kind of from the cognitive side, not from my real feelings, but from the cognitive side, I was able to build a strength there. Because if you speak out those beautiful things, like admit that there's beauty, if you say, yes, this was kind, this person was kind, that is the place where you build a strength parallel to your grief process, where you're pretty down and you're true to yourself, you're going through this grief process, but you're building a parallel strength. I hope the examples make it clear. We'll get into this more. So let's reiterate this a little bit. Let's talk more about this trick that helped me and that can really help during an experience of grief and loss in a relocation. So we have this grieving process, and usually it takes some time till we come to this point of accepting and being open to new things, like really feeling and receiving the beauty around us. And what we're doing is more like from a cognitive, or like from a mere decision, from a standpoint of, okay, I'm a grown-up responsible person or something like that. It doesn't matter where you take it from, but it's more like just a decision to make a point independent of the grieving process and what I feel. And it feels like a paradox, it's okay, to acknowledge the beauty and the good around me and say, yes, you know, this person is nice, this place is beautiful, and so on. In the last videos, we talked about this trick we can use when we go through a relocation and experience a strong sense of grief or loss. Now, there are some other tricks we can use. One has to do with the fact that I started salsa dancing, which, you know, if I'm in a dance studio, I'm still getting used to seeing myself in the large mirror. And also, of course, we had to take a break during COVID now. But there are quite a few things that we can do to support our grieving process, still being true to it. And also what I love about it, it goes along with the findings of science, of positive psychology, neurobiology, neuroscience, and that's the great thing around it.